This is my thesis. It's called Getting It On with Patience, the role of rhetoric and seduction to leadership. And I have to thank Rikke for the title. Thank you. And also I have to thank Alex because he actually insisted that my field of investigation should be charm management. And so this is basically charm management. And what is charm management? We have to look into that. And it's not easy to define what is charm management, so I've actually been working a bit on that. But one of the ways into charm management is actually through seduction and rhetoric. If I have to say in a short form what is charm management, that would be indirect communication. That is the process of making aware. And the reason why I label the way I do leadership myself charm management is because I'm 32 years old. I'm part of the digital generation, and actually I lead teams across countries. And I lead young people, young digital people. I lead very experienced persons who are much older than I am and who really knows the stuff. So how can I lead these guys? How can I inspire them? And my method is actually charm management. And what is charm management? That is this process of making aware. And indirect communication comes from the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. And he has this notion that he wanted to write without authority. That means how can you actually point someone in a direction without having a predetermined conclusions on what should they actually think about this. So that's one of the reasons why Søren Kierkegaard, he always wrote, without his own name on anything he wrote. But it's basically the same that charm management is. It's leading without authority, but with charm. And how to do that? I've been thinking about that. And one of the things that I do in my leadership ways is I'm posing puzzles. I'm pointing in a direction. I'm pointing to a problem. And then I'm not doing anything about it. I'm just pointing in a direction, and then I wait, because if you pose a puzzle and have this and create this ambiguity, people will start, to be interested, and they will start to figure out what is this, and they want to evoke a response. They want to figure out what they want a closure on this one. And suddenly they have to think for themselves. They have to figure out themselves, what do they think about this process. So that's one of the things, that's one of the ways I define charm management. And the reason I'm here today, and the reason I've been reading about this seduction and rhetoric, that is because I believe that rhetoric and seduction can actually bring us some new tools and principles for actually doing well in the digital world. Today I will just present two examples of how these new principles are going to be, and that's because I want to take you through my journey. First of all, the reason, of course I had lots of false beginnings. Because I wanted to write something about the digital era, and that this digital is suddenly the foundation for all business, and that everyone is suddenly so digital that you can't, if you call them digital, it's like characterizing them as air breathing. Come on, it's, this is just so fundamental. But the trouble about digital is this, that if you want to write anything about digital, it will be dated within like 4 months or so. And I was not prepared to spend 2 months on something that was dated within 4 months. That I couldn't stand that. So the first thing I was actually looking into was to take this opportunity to come up with principles for the digital things that actually will valid and will last for like 5 years. Some basic general principles about what is it that this digital wave actually changes for us in our industry. So that was the first thing. That is, we want to do something about digital, but we don't want to do it like in a dated way. The other thing that kickstarted this rhetorical seduction era was this one. This is the 3 pieces. You all know these pieces because you work. This is the 3 pieces of an average large organization. And it is, of course, extremely simplified, but you get the picture. We have a design and content stuff division. We have a silo here. We have 3 silos. First one is doing the design content. Then we have the marketing silo, and then we have the service or the after-sales silo. And basically the last one is just dealing with all the consequences of what I promised in the first silo and the second silo and that I did not deliver on. So this is how organizational life is, and that's why it's so interesting when we taught about, integrated marketing and whatever. This is basically the reality, isn't it? This is also many of the agencies I work for. We organize the same way. So we have 3 silos, and there are 2 rules in this one. The first rule is no silos can ever talk with each other. That's rule number 1. We never talk with each other. And everything will proceed from left, slowly, very slowly, to the right. And that means when we in the agency world actually meet anything, a product, anything, we'll meet it here. And that means at that point, nobody wants to hear anything about how could this product be improved. They don't want to hear anything because it took forever to get that product from this place to this place. So they really don't want to hear anything about where that product, how that could be improved. And this is actually how organizations are built, and this is how the world works. And again, that's an issue because this is not how the digital world is. This is not at all suited to figuring out how should we actually conduct, how should we build brains, how should we lead teams, how should we build organizations, if this is how the world actually is. So what do we need? I think what we need is a new process inside. So I had to ask myself, okay, if we need a new kind of process and we need something that can break down these silos and something that can help us in marketing when we're doing digital business solutions and whatever, what can actually help us? Who are really good with processes? Who are really masters of leading, inspiring, creative processes? And basically, I had to look outside our industry because this is a broken model, isn't it? This is not, we can't find any answers in this model, so we have to look outside our own industry. And what I was aiming for was figuring out how can we look into something that is instead of being very result-oriented, which is our business, we need to figure out how can we celebrate the process, how can we actually not just make the process the means to the end, but actually really take the process and figure out what the principles are. And then I had to look into what our friend John Hegarty, because one of the first sessions in this room, he taught us about the power of irreverence, and I thought that was quite interesting. Basically, he said that all the best ideas are probably comes from thinking outside the box. We know that, thinking outside the book. But what I loved the most was that he insisted to observe a category with rule-free eyes, and that's basically what I'm trying to do on this topic, because how can I help our industry and how can I help businesses with something that is completely irreverent and something where we can have some insights that we have not seen so far. So basically, I ended up at this because some people that are really, really good at processes are master seducers. And so what I did was that I investigated seduction narratives, and I looked into these 3 pieces, and which is masterpieces, each and every one of them, to figure out what is the principles behind how to celebrate a process that we can actually use in our business world. The first one is Dangereuse Liaison. It's from 1782, and anyone read that book? Yeah, you saw the movie. Of course, you saw the movie. Anyway, this is a how to do seduction work. And if you ever have to seduce anyone, you have to read this book. And if you ever have to come up with a brilliant defense strategy, please read this book, because it's got all the tips and tricks on how to do seduction. So I started out with this one, and that's also the very authoritative piece of seduction narrative. Everyone says that this is the starting point. If you have to look into seduction, start with this piece. So I looked into that one. What is brilliant about Dangereuse Liaison is that we have 2 master seducers. That's Valmont and Merteuil, and basically they're seducing each other by writing letters to each other about how they seduce others. Very complicated. But never mind. What is brilliant about them is they teach us in that piece. They teach us that the process is interesting in itself, and we need slowness and we need a lot of preparation to actually to be good at seduction. What is not very good about it is that it's extremely manipulative. And also the trouble about this piece is that it's very erotic. It's lots of erotic scenes, and from a business leadership perspective, that's not exactly very helpful. So how can I actually, so you know, we couldn't just stop with that piece. So from that piece, we actually got the process and the manner in which you do your seduction is as important as the goal of the actual seduction. That was one thing. So 60 years later, approximately 60 years later, Søren Kierkegaard again, he's a Danish philosopher. He wrote the work Either Or, and Johannes the Seducer is one of the fragments of that book. And basically what he outlines in this one is a theory for seduction. Because Johannes is, what is great about this piece is that this is very erotic, and what Kierkegaard does is he takes out all the erotic elements of seduction and actually treats it as a theory. So, for example, Johannes, he seduces lots of women, and he does that for an aesthetic enjoyment. So he has this intellectual interest in seduction. How does it work? How can I seduce people? So he's outlining compiling all the principles and outlining a theory for seduction. The trouble on this one, again, is right now, okay, we took seduction out of the sexual thing, which is quite helpful for us. And also we took it out from being rather result-oriented, because basically they just want to shag someone over here, to being very process-oriented, because here he's actually much more concerned of how can I penetrate the mind of women and not just women. So here we have actually the process is in focus, and also we have this, that the sexual is now out of the seduction structure. That's very helpful, but we have this issue that he is seducing women and he will never fall in love with them. So we have a very ethical thing here. It's still extremely manipulative, and he's just seducing for the aesthetic enjoyment. So what Kierkegaard actually asks us here is, what are the possibilities for actually creating a seductive discourse that is not manipulative, that is not sexual, that is not unsound? How can we create some processes that is actually feeling good? It actually makes us feel good. So that's good. Now we got a theory, but we still miss something. And then I looked into the seducer. That's Jan Kjærstad. He is a Norwegian author, and he's quite famous for that novel. It's a very postmodern novel. It's at the end of the centuries. And what is interesting is about the seducer is that this is Jonas Vævland. And Jonas and Johannes, you can see how the names are aligned. But what is interesting about the seducer is that Jonas Vævland, who is the seducer, never seduces any women in this book. Basically, he is seduced 17 times by women, and he never managed to seduce anyone. So what is all this seduction about? What is great about that novel is that, first of all, that he tells us that the idea of seduction being something erotic is completely wrong. That's not what seduction is about. Actually, the erotic thing is actually really clouding our understanding of the potential of seduction. Instead, he says, seduction is an epistemic approach. It's the potential of making people coming from somewhere indifferent to somewhere where they actually suddenly feel as if they can actually change their lives, change their world. So you empower them. And epistemics, that's basically the knowledge of knowing. That's the knowledge of how do you acquire knowledge. And that's very interesting, because suddenly we have a concept up here where you have, the minute you take seduction out of the sexual thing, the minute you take away the manipulative thing, because if it's suddenly about how do you acquire knowledge, how can you change the world, how can you change people's minds, people's actions, people's outlooks, if that's what it's all about, suddenly you have a mutually engaging process. So you don't produce winners and losers, as we do in those two seduction narratives, suddenly you have a very mutually engaging process where you can actually proceed something. So that was my field of research. And from these 3 pieces, I took out lots of interesting tips and tricks for how to actually celebrate the process and not just the result. But I want to tell you 2 things. First of all, why is seduction interesting for anyone? Business leader, creative leadership, leading brains, leading teams, whatever. First of all, seduction is about resistance, and we know that from our work, doesn't we? You know, even though you want to convince a client or you want to convince team members or whatever, there must be resistance, because if there's not resistance, there's no reason to do anything seductive, because then it would just happen spontaneously. So what I really like about this seduction approach is that what seduction can teach us something about is not just how to persuade, because we're very interested in that as leaders and also as a rhetorician, but it can tell us something about how do people want to be persuaded, and how do they start to commit to a worldview and start to taking responsibility to change their own initial resistance towards the process. And that's basically what we can get from seduction, which is very useful for anyone who is actually going to persuade someone. I would say the phenomena of persuading others to let themselves be persuaded, that's really the centerpiece of what seduction can deliver for us. 2 things I want to show you. First one is this one. It's the twins, if anyone wants to know. We have this concept in Rhetoric. It's called kairos, and that one of the basic principles for seduction is double movement, and that means you need to progress aggressively, and then you need to be patient and keep your distance and stand back, and you need to do both constantly. And my point here is that at business, it's all about exigence. It's all about action. It's all about the timing, the possibility, the change, the now. And rhetoric is that as well. And that's basically the active side of kairos. That's timing, that's actions, that's all that. And we used to do that in business, but what we don't do in business, and what we're not very good at either when we lead teams or when we lead brains or whatever, is the passive side of kairos, and that's patience. That is to slow down the processes. That is to retard action. That is to stand back. That is to keep your distance. And that's something we never does as a brain. We always, very aggressive. We're very onto everything. And what I think seduction can teach us as an industry and as everyone is we need this balance, and we need to figure out how can we put some retardant into our processes. So that's one issue for our industry to figure out. Another one, I think, and a quite surprising one for us is, and I was very surprised to find that in Seduction, but I think it's absolutely brilliant. That is that when Jan Kjærstad, he changes seduction from being something connected with eros and manipulation and something very unstable, unsound. That's how we know seduction, and changes it into an agent that can actually transform people from being passive and indifferent into actually, want to instill positive feeling in them, instill a wish to change the world, instill a wish in them to act. Then I think that's absolutely brilliant that as something as weird as seduction can actually teach us that. And I think our industry is way too pleased with just pushing brains and just, telling about brains' own virtues, and we're just product pushers, aren't we? We don't want anything else than just push some products. And what I like about seduction, and this maybe modern kind of seduction, is that this is actually a potential for our industry and for our role, not just as leaders of teams or brains, but also that we build, that we use all our techniques and our principles and methods, compile them, and that we put them into something that can actually change the world and not just promote brains. So that's the two things I think that are quite important for us. So basically, that's a short rundown on seduction and rhetoric and the potential for leadership. And now you can ask me anything you like.